If you opened your eyes this morning and felt a heaviness holding you down, not exhaustion from lack of sleep, not physical illness, but something deeper and harder to name, then what I'm about to tell you will change how you see yourself. You are not lazy. You are not weak. You are not failing. Jung would tell you something that no productivity guru, no motivational speaker, no well-meaning friend will ever say. Your desire to lie down might be the most honest thing about you right now. It might be your soul's first language, and ignoring it might be costing you everything. There are mornings when your body refuses to cooperate with your mind, when every task feels hollow, when the simple act of standing feels like moving through water. And if you're like most people, you've learned to punish yourself for this. You call it lack of discipline. You shame yourself for not pushing through. You compare yourself to people who seem to wake up ready, energized, hungry for the day. But Jung spent decades studying this heaviness, and what he discovered was radical. He found that the desire to lie down, this pull towards stillness that you've been fighting, is not a symptom of weakness. It's a message from the deepest part of your psyche, a signal that something in your life has fallen so far out of alignment that your soul has withdrawn its energy as protection. Your body is not betraying you. It's trying to save you. In 1913, Jung himself experienced this. At the height of his career, respected, successful, admired, he suddenly couldn't function. He would sit for hours unable to move, unable to think, unable to engage with the world that had once energized him. His colleagues thought he was having a breakdown, but Jung realized he was having a breakthrough. His psyche was forcing him to stop because his outer life no longer matched his inner truth. The persona he'd built, the successful psychologist, the Freud protégé, the conventional academic, was a costume his soul could no longer wear. And until he stopped pretending, his body refused to cooperate. He called this the confrontation with the unconscious, the moment when your deeper self pulls the emergency brake on a life that's betraying who you actually are. And here's what Jung discovered that changed everything. This heaviness is not random. It follows patterns. It speaks a language. And once you learn to read that language, the exhaustion transforms from an enemy into a guide. But, and this is what no one tells you, there's a dark side to this process, a trap that most people fall into, a way that sacred tiredness can become something far more dangerous. Because Jung also documented what happens when people misunderstand this message, when they interpret the soul's withdrawal as permission to give up entirely, when they use "my soul is speaking" as spiritual bypass for the hard work of actually changing their lives. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to show you what Jung discovered about the 5 forms of soul tiredness, how to recognize which one is speaking to you, and the critical difference between sacred rest and spiritual paralysis, because that difference determines whether this heaviness becomes your transformation or your trap. Jung believed that your body knows things your conscious mind refuses to admit. Long before you can articulate what's wrong, your body feels it. Long before you're ready to admit a chapter has ended, your body stops cooperating with it. Long before you understand that something in your life is draining you, your body withdraws the energy to continue it. This is not weakness. Jung called it somatic intelligence, the wisdom of the organism that protects you from betraying yourself. Think about it this way. You can lie to your mind. You can convince yourself that everything is fine. You can gaslight yourself into believing that the job that crushes your spirit is just what adults do, that the relationship where you perform a false self is mature compromise, that the life you've built to please others is being responsible. But you cannot lie to your body. Your body is older than your thoughts. It remembers things your conscious mind has forgotten. It carries truths your ego has buried. And when the gap between how you're living and who you actually are becomes too wide, the body does the only thing it can. It refuses to move forward. This shows up as that strange, inexplicable heaviness. You slept 8 hours but wake exhausted. You have no medical condition but feel physically depleted. You used to have energy for your life, but now every morning feels like wading through fog. Jung saw this pattern in patient after patient. A woman who'd spent 20 years in a marriage where she performed happiness, her body suddenly couldn't get out of bed. A man who'd built a successful career in a field that meant nothing to him, his body stopped cooperating at age 40. A young person molding themselves to meet their parents' expectations, their energy vanished the moment they graduated. In every case, the conscious mind insisted nothing was wrong, but the body knew better. Jung wrote, "The psyche is not separate from the body. When the soul can no longer inhabit the life you're forcing it to live, it withdraws. And that withdrawal manifests first through the flesh, through fatigue, through heaviness, through the overwhelming desire to simply lie still. This is why pushing through doesn't work. This is why discipline fails. This is why all the productivity hacks and morning routines and motivation videos leave you feeling more exhausted than before, because you're trying to force your body to carry a life your soul has already left. The heaviness is not the problem. The heaviness is the alarm system. It's your psyche's way of saying, something here is deeply wrong, and I will not give you the energy to continue it until you stop and listen. Jung believed this is a sacred moment, a threshold. Your soul is speaking the only language it has left. But here's where it gets dangerous. Here's where most people take a wrong turn, because there are two ways to respond to this heaviness. One leads to transformation. The other leads to what Jung called psychological inflation through victimhood, using your exhaustion as identity, as excuse, as permanent refuge from the hard work of actually living. The difference between these two paths is everything. Sacred tiredness says, something must change. I'm being shown what's no longer true. Spiritual paralysis says, I'm too tired to change anything. My exhaustion proves I'm special, sensitive, damaged beyond repair. One is the chrysalis, the other is the grave. And Jung found that most people, even people doing real inner work, confuse the two. They mistake collapse for transformation. They interpret the soul's call to stop and restructure as permission to stop and stay stopped forever. This is the trap. And before we explore the 5 forms of soul tiredness, you need to understand how to tell the difference, because your body's message deserves to be heard, but it also deserves to be translated correctly. Jung discovered that not all tiredness carries the same message. Each form speaks a different truth. Each requires a different response. Learning to distinguish them is the difference between honoring your soul and hiding from your life. This is the exhaustion that rises when your outer life no longer matches your inner values. You move through your days doing things that once felt important, but now feel hollow. The job that once gave you purpose now drains you. The relationships that once felt authentic now feel performative. Even your successes feel strangely empty, like you're winning at a game you no longer want to play. Jung called this energy withdrawn from the false self. Your psyche senses that you're living according to someone else's script, your parents' expectations, society's definition of success, a younger version of yourself who wanted different things. And it quietly refuses to power that performance anymore. This shows up as the feeling that you're moving through your life, but not living it. Tasks feel heavier than they should. Conversations require more effort than they used to. By afternoon, you feel depleted not from hard work, but from pretending. The body becomes heavy because the soul has left the building. Jung observed this most often in people approaching midlife, but it can happen at any age. The moment you've outgrown the identity you built, the moment your authentic self no longer fits the life you're living, this tiredness appears. The message, something in your life is a lie, and your soul will not participate in that lie anymore. But here's the trap Jung warned about. People feel this misalignment, and instead of asking, what must change, they ask, what's wrong with me? They try to fix their energy with better sleep, better diet, better routines, all of which help the body, but miss the message entirely. Because the tiredness isn't asking you to optimize your life, it's asking you to restructure it. The woman in the marriage where she performs happiness doesn't need more self-care. She needs an honest conversation or an exit. The man in the career that drains him doesn't need a vacation. He needs to admit his life took a wrong turn and find the courage to redirect. This form of tiredness is your soul protecting you from wasting more years on a path that's not yours. Some heaviness belongs to the past, not the present. There are losses you never fully processed, endings you never honored, versions of yourself that died quietly without funeral or witness, dreams that dissolved, people who left, chapters that closed before you were ready to let them go. Jung understood that unprocessed grief doesn't disappear. It becomes weight. It absorbs psychic energy like a sponge, quietly draining your vitality until you finally turn around and face what you've been running from. This tiredness feels different. It's accompanied by a vague sadness you can't quite name, a heaviness in your chest, a sense that something is unfinished. You might find yourself thinking about the past more than usual. Old memories surface without warning. People you haven't thought about in years suddenly appear in dreams. Your soul is asking you to stop and grieve. But modern culture has no patience for grief. It expects you to move on quickly, to stay positive, to focus on the future. So you bury the losses. You tell yourself you're over it. You keep moving, and your body keeps getting heavier. Jung believed that grief must be metabolized, not suppressed. The psyche needs time to integrate loss, to honor what was loved, to say goodbye to what's gone. When you deny this process, the soul holds a vigil on your behalf. It withdraws energy from the present, redirecting it to tend the unfinished business of the past. The message: you have not honored what you lost. Until you do, I will hold this space. But here's where it becomes dangerous. Some people discover this grief and make it their permanent identity. They become the one who lost. They use their unmourned past as excuse to never fully live in the present. Jung saw this frequently. People who found comfort in their sadness, who built an identity around their wounds, who used "I'm still grieving" as shield against the risk of living again. Sacred grief says, I will honor what I lost, and then I will continue. Spiritual paralysis says, I lost too much. I can never move forward again. One is healing, the other is hiding. The tiredness of unmourned grief is an invitation to finally feel what you've been avoiding, to cry the tears you held back, to rage at the unfairness, to acknowledge how much you loved what's gone, and then, and this is critical, to release it so your energy can return to building what's next. Some people are born with their emotional skin too thin. They absorb the moods of everyone around them. They feel the tension in rooms before anyone speaks. They carry the weight of other people's pain as if it were their own. Jung called these people emotional sponges, highly sensitive to the psychic atmosphere, picking up shifts in the collective mood long before others notice. If you're this person, you know what it feels like. You walk into a room and immediately sense conflict, even if everyone is smiling. You spend time with someone who seems fine, but you feel their hidden sadness. You watch the news and carry the suffering of strangers for days. This isn't weakness. It's not your imagination. Jung believed some nervous systems are wired for deeper perception. They function as early warning systems, sensing emotional weather patterns others miss entirely. But the cost is exhaustion. Your system becomes flooded with feelings that aren't even yours. By the end of the day, sometimes by noon, you feel emotionally depleted, not from your own life, but from absorbing everyone else's. This tiredness has a specific quality. It feels overwhelming, chaotic, like your nervous system is short-circuiting. You might need to retreat from people entirely. Silence becomes medicine. Alone time becomes necessity, not preference. The message: your system is overloaded. You must clear the emotional debris you've absorbed so you can return to your own baseline. Jung recommended what he called emotional hygiene. deliberate practices to cleanse absorbed energy, time alone in nature, physical movement to discharge what's been internalized, conscious boundary setting around whose emotions you're willing to carry. But here's the trap. Many sensitive people use their sensitivity as excuse to never develop boundaries. They say, "I'm an empath. I can't help absorbing everything," as if their wiring means they're doomed to perpetual overwhelm. Jung was blunt about this. Sensitivity is real, but learned helplessness is a choice. Yes, you feel more than others, but that doesn't mean you're powerless to protect your energy. It means you must become even more skilled at boundaries, at discernment, at knowing what's yours to carry and what isn't. The tiredness of emotional overload is asking you to develop sovereignty over your emotional space, not to shut down your sensitivity, but to learn how to be sensitive without being destroyed by it. Sacred sensitivity says, "I feel deeply, so I must protect fiercely." Spiritual paralysis says, "I feel too much. I'm a victim of my own wiring." One leads to empowered boundaries. The other leads to permanent retreat. There are moments in life when one identity dissolves and the next has not yet formed. You're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. Jung called this the liminal space, the threshold between two worlds where nothing is solid. During these transitions, you might feel exhausted for no clear reason. Your life hasn't fallen apart. Nothing dramatic has happened, but you feel unmoored, uncertain, unable to locate yourself. This is the tiredness of metamorphosis. Inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar doesn't just grow wings, it dissolves completely. Its entire structure liquefies. For a time, it is neither caterpillar nor butterfly. It is soup, formless, unrecognizable. Jung believed humans undergo similar transitions, the college student becoming an adult, the young adult becoming a parent, the career-focused person becoming someone who wants more than ambition, the wounded person becoming someone who's healed. During these thresholds, enormous psychic energy is used to dismantle old structures and build new ones. The conscious mind feels only the exhaustion. It doesn't see the construction happening beneath awareness. You might feel lost, directionless, like you don't know who you are anymore. Everything that used to define you feels distant, but the new self hasn't solidified yet. This is terrifying. It's also sacred. The message: you are between worlds. Let yourself be formless while the unconscious rebuilds you. But here's where people get stuck. They panic in the liminal space. They try to rush back to who they were, or force the new identity to arrive before it's ready. They say, "I don't know who I am anymore," as if it's a problem to be solved immediately. Jung insisted, the liminal space cannot be rushed. Transformation has its own timeline. Your only job is to tolerate the uncertainty, to resist the urge to grab onto an old identity just because the new one hasn't arrived yet. Sacred transition says, "I am becoming. I will trust the process even when I can't see where it's leading." Spiritual paralysis says, "I've lost myself. I'll never find solid ground again." One surrenders to metamorphosis. The other uses confusion as excuse to never fully emerge. The tiredness of transition is your soul asking for patience. The construction is happening. You just can't see it yet. There is an energy within every human that longs to create, to imagine, to build, to express something original. Jung called it the creative instinct, as fundamental to human nature as the need for food or connection. When this creative force flows, you feel alive, energized, purposeful. Even if you're not an artist in the traditional sense, you're creating, solving problems, building relationships, shaping your environment in ways that feel authentic. But when this creative instinct is blocked by routine, by a life that demands only practicality, by fear of failure, by years of being told your ideas don't matter, the energy doesn't disappear. It turns inward, it stagnates, it becomes weight. Jung observed this frequently. People in jobs that required no imagination, people in relationships where authenticity was punished, people who'd suppressed their creative impulses so long they'd forgotten they had them. They would come to him exhausted, describing a vague emptiness, a sense that life was grey, flat, mechanical. They were functioning fine, meeting their obligations, but feeling nothing. This is the heaviness of unused creative fire. The soul is saying, "You're wasting my energy on survival. I was built for more than this." The message, something in you wants to create. Ignoring it is suffocating your vitality. But here's the trap Jung warned about. Many people feel this block, and instead of actually creating, they fantasize about creating. They dream of writing the book, starting the business, changing careers, but never take the first step. They use blocked creativity as romantic identity. "I'm an artist trapped in this mundane life" becomes an excuse to never risk actually making anything. Jung was ruthless about this. The soul doesn't care about your perfect conditions. It doesn't need you to quit your job and move to a cabin in the woods. It needs you to start, small, imperfect. Today, sacred creativity says, "I will make something, anything, to let the energy flow again." Spiritual paralysis says, "I can't create until everything is perfect, until I have time, space, permission." One creates despite obstacles, the other uses obstacles as eternal excuse. The tiredness of blocked creativity is asking you to stop waiting and start making. Even if it's messy, even if it's small, the soul doesn't need masterpieces, it needs movement. Now here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. These 5 forms of soul tiredness are real. They carry legitimate messages. They deserve to be honored. But Jung also documented a pattern that should terrify anyone walking this path. The difference between people who use sacred tiredness as transformation and people who use it as permanent refuge. He saw it again and again in his practice. A patient would come to him exhausted, depleted, unable to function. Jung would help them identify which form of soul tiredness was speaking, would guide them to hear the message, would support them through the necessary changes. And then something would happen that Jung didn't expect at first, but came to recognize as almost inevitable. Some patients didn't want to recover. They'd found something comfortable in their exhaustion, something that gave them permission to not try, something that made them special in their own eyes, something that excused them from the hard, risky work of actually living. Jung called this the neurotic claim to exemption, using genuine psychological processes as justification for permanent withdrawal from life. These people would learn the language of soul tiredness and weaponize it. Every challenge became, "My soul is calling me to rest." Every boundary they needed to set became, "I'm too sensitive for this world." Every creative impulse they ignored became, "I'm blocked by trauma." They used Jung's own frameworks to build elaborate prisons and called them sanctuaries. And the most dangerous part? They were often the most vocal about their spiritual journey. They'd talk endlessly about honoring their soul, about sacred rest, about not forcing themselves to meet society's expectations. But Jung saw through it. He saw that they'd confused honoring the soul with abandoning responsibility. They'd mistaken sacred pause with permanent paralysis. He wrote in his private notes about one patient, "She has learned the language of the psyche and uses it to justify never risking anything again. She calls it wisdom. I call it cowardice wearing spiritual clothing." This is the shadow side of understanding soul tiredness. Once you know these patterns, you can use them in 2 ways. 1. As a compass pointing toward necessary change. You hear the message, make the hard adjustments, and then move forward with renewed energy because your life now matches your truth. 2. As a shield protecting you from ever having to change anything. You hear the message, announce you're honoring your soul's wisdom, and use that spiritual language to justify staying exactly where you are forever. The first is transformation. The second is spiritual bypass disguised as depth. Jung saw this most often with the tiredness of transition. People would recognize they were in the liminal space between identities, between chapters, and they'd never leave it. They'd stay in the chrysalis forever, claiming they were still becoming year after year after year. He'd ask, "When does becoming end and being begin?" They had no answer, because the liminal space had become their identity. The transition had become permanent. They were using "I'm in transformation" as excuse to never fully transform. Jung also saw this with emotional sensitivity. People would discover they were empaths, that they absorbed others' emotions, and they'd use that discovery as reason to withdraw from all human contact entirely. They'd say, "I'm too sensitive for relationships, too sensitive for work, too sensitive for life." Jung would respond, "Then you're not sensitive. You're self-imprisoned. True sensitivity learns to exist in the world without being destroyed by it." And he saw it with blocked creativity. People who talk about their unexpressed creative soul for decades, but never actually create anything. Because creating meant risking failure, judgment, imperfection. Staying blocked was safer. Here's how you know which path you're on. Sacred tiredness leads to change. You hear the message, you adjust your life, and gradually your energy returns. You might lie down for a season, but you rise for the next chapter. Spiritual paralysis leads to permanence. You hear the message, you announce you're honoring it, but nothing actually changes. Years pass and you're still too tired, still in transition, still honoring your soul's need for rest. Jung's test was simple. Is this tiredness transforming you or defining you? If it's transforming you, it will move through you. You'll pass through the exhaustion like winter giving way to spring, hard but temporary, painful but purposeful. If it's defining you, it will stay with you. It becomes your identity, your story, your excuse. Comfortable but stagnant, safe but lifeless. The brutal truth Jung discovered. Some people would rather stay exhausted than do the hard work of changing their lives. Because exhaustion gives them permission to not try, and honoring my soul sounds so much more spiritual than I'm afraid to risk anything. This is why Jung insisted that soul tiredness must be honored, but also interrogated. You must ask, am I listening to a legitimate message? Or am I using this exhaustion to hide from my life? Most people don't want to ask that question because the answer might reveal something uncomfortable. So now you're standing at the choice point Jung mapped in patient after patient. You've recognized that your desire to lie down carries a message. You've identified which form of soul tiredness is speaking. You've felt the truth of it land in your body. Now comes the moment that determines everything. What do you do with this awareness? Because awareness alone changes nothing. Jung was clear about this. Understanding why you're tired is just the beginning. The transformation happens in what comes next. There are two paths from here. Path 1, the path of integration. You hear the message and let it restructure you. You make the changes it's asking for, even when they're terrifying, even when they're costly, even when everyone around you thinks you're making a mistake. If it's the tiredness of misalignment, you have the hard conversation. You leave the job that's killing you. You stop performing the version of yourself that everyone expects. You disappoint people by being honest. If it's the tiredness of unmourned grief, you finally stop running. You let yourself feel the full weight of what you lost. You cry the tears you've been holding for years. And then, and this is critical, you release it and turn toward what's next. If it's the tiredness of emotional overload, you build ruthless boundaries. You stop absorbing everyone's pain as if it's your job to fix the world. You learn to be sensitive without being destroyed. If it's the tiredness of transition, you sit in the discomfort of not knowing who you are. You resist grabbing onto old identities just because they're familiar. You trust that the new self is forming even when you can't see it yet. If it's the tiredness of blocked creativity, you start, today, imperfectly, without waiting for permission or perfect conditions. You let the creative energy flow even if what you make is terrible at first. This path is hard. It requires courage. It demands that you tolerate discomfort, uncertainty, other people's disappointment in you. It asks you to trust the soul's guidance, even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. But this is the path where energy returns, where vitality flows back into your life, where the exhaustion transforms into something else, not immediately, not magically, but gradually, like spring emerging from winter. Path 2. The path of spiritual paralysis. You hear the message and use it as permission to stop entirely. You learn the language of soul tiredness and weaponize it into excuse. You say, "I'm honoring my soul's need for rest," but years pass and you never actually change anything. You say, "I'm in transition," but you never emerge. You say, "I'm too sensitive," but you never develop boundaries. You say, "I'm creatively blocked," but you never actually create. You build an identity around your exhaustion. You become the one who's too tired. You surround yourself with others who validate your exhaustion. You spend more time talking about why you can't function than you spend actually trying to function. This path is easier in the short term. It requires no risk. It demands no change. It lets you stay exactly where you are while claiming spiritual depth. But this is the path where energy never returns, where exhaustion becomes permanent, where you wake up 5 years from now and realize you used honoring your soul as an excuse to hide from your life. Jung saw both paths clearly, and he saw that most people, even people doing real inner work, slip onto the second path without realizing it, because the second path uses the same language as the first. It sounds identical. Someone on path 1 says, "I need to rest to integrate this change." Someone on path 2 says the exact same words. The difference is invisible to the outside world, but the soul knows the difference, and so do you, if you're willing to be honest. Here's Jung's diagnostic question. Is this rest preparing you for movement, or is it replacing movement entirely? If it's sacred rest, you lie down, you listen, you integrate, and then gradually you feel the first stirrings of energy returning, the desire to try again, the curiosity about what comes next, the willingness to risk. If it's spiritual paralysis, you lie down and you stay down. The rest becomes permanent. The exhaustion becomes identity, and you use Jung's own teachings to justify never rising again. You know which path you're on. You might not want to admit it. But somewhere beneath all the spiritual language, beneath all the talk about honoring your soul, you know. The question is, do you have the courage to face it? Because if you're on path 2, if you've been using your exhaustion as excuse, as identity, as permanent refuge, this is your wake-up call. Jung isn't offering you permission to stay tired forever. He's offering you a map for transformation. But transformation requires that you eventually transform. The chrysalis is meant to break open. The winter is meant to give way to spring. The rest is meant to prepare you for movement, not replace it. So the choice is yours. Will you use this understanding to finally change your life? Or will you use it to justify never changing anything at all? If you're ready to walk the path of integration, if you're willing to let this tiredness transform you rather than define you, Jung offered specific guidance. First, name which form of tiredness is speaking. Don't stay vague. "I'm just tired" is too general. Get specific. Which of the 5 forms carries your message? Misalignment, unmourned grief, emotional overload, transition, blocked creativity? Name it. Write it down. Make it concrete. Second, ask the 3 sacred questions Jung used with every patient. What is this tiredness protecting me from facing? What change is my soul demanding that I'm afraid to make? What version of me is trying to die so a new one can be born? Don't rush these questions. Sit with them. Let the answers come from your body, not your mind. The truth often arrives as sensation, as image, as whisper, not as logical thought. Third, make one small change today, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Today. If it's misalignment, Have one honest conversation you've been avoiding. Or write down 3 things in your life that feel false. If it's unmourned grief, spend 10 minutes feeling what you've been running from. Set a timer. Let yourself cry. If it's emotional overload, say no to one thing you'd normally absorb. Practice one boundary. If it's transition, write a goodbye letter to who you were. Honor the old self before releasing it. If it's blocked creativity, make something terrible for 5 minutes. The point is movement, not masterpiece. Small, imperfect. Today. 4th, track your energy honestly. Over the next 2 weeks, notice, is your tiredness shifting, even slightly? Are you feeling small returns of energy on days when you honor the message? Or is your tiredness exactly the same 2 weeks from now, despite your supposed soul work? If it's the same, you're likely on path 2, using spiritual language to justify staying stuck. And that's critical information. Don't lie to yourself about it. 5th, find someone who'll challenge you lovingly, not someone who'll validate your exhaustion endlessly, not someone who'll tell you you're too sensitive for this world, not someone who'll co-sign your spiritual bypass. Find someone who loves you enough to ask, is this rest healing you or hiding you? Jung believed we can't see our own shadow alone. We need others to mirror what we can't see in ourselves. 6th, set a timeline. This is crucial. Jung would ask patients in the liminal space, how long will you give yourself in the chrysalis? Not as punishment, as structure. Because transformation without timeline becomes permanent transition. If you're resting from misalignment, give yourself 3 months to make the necessary changes. If you're grieving, give yourself a season to fully feel it, then consciously turn toward what's next. If you're in transition, acknowledge that you're between worlds, but also acknowledge that you can't stay there forever. Sacred rest has seasons. Spiritual paralysis has no end date. Finally, watch for the subtle return of energy. It won't come as a bolt of lightning. It will come as a quiet stirring, a small curiosity, a gentle desire to try something, a soft warmth in your chest when you think about moving forward. Don't ignore these whispers. They're the soul saying, I've finished the work. I'm ready for the next chapter. And when that whisper comes, honor it by taking one small step, then another, then another. Not forcing, not pushing, but also not hiding. This is integration. This is transformation. This is the difference between people who honor their soul's tiredness and people who use it as permanent excuse. If you reach this point, I want you to hear this clearly. Your desire to lie down is real. The message is real. The soul is speaking. You are not broken for feeling this heaviness. You are not weak for needing to stop. You are not failing for refusing to push through. Jung would tell you, this tiredness is a gift. It's your psyche's way of saying, something here needs attention. Something here needs to change, and I will not let you run past it anymore. But he would also tell you this, the gift is only valuable if you open it. If you hear the message and use it to transform your life, you step into the most powerful version of yourself you've ever known. You become someone who listens to their soul, someone who has the courage to live aligned with their truth, someone who trusts their inner wisdom over external expectations. But if you hear the message and use it to justify permanent withdrawal, you waste the gift. You trade transformation for stagnation. You confuse honoring your soul with abandoning your life. The difference between these two paths is simple. One leads to temporary rest followed by renewed movement. The other leads to permanent exhaustion disguised as spiritual depth. You know which path you're on, and if you're honest, you know which path you've been choosing. But here's the beautiful thing Jung discovered. You can change paths at any moment, even if you've been stuck for years, even if you've built an entire identity around your exhaustion, even if everyone around you expects you to stay tired forever. Today, right now, you can choose differently. You can honor the message your soul is sending without using it as permanent excuse. You can rest without hiding. You can stop without staying stopped forever. Your body is not your enemy. It's trying to guide you back to a life that's true, back to a self that's authentic, back to a path that matches who you actually are beneath all the expectations, all the performance, all the years of pretending. The heaviness you feel is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your becoming, but only if you're brave enough to let it transform you instead of letting it define you. So here's your choice. Will you lie down to rest and integrate, or will you lie down to hide forever? Will you use this tiredness as the chrysalis it's meant to be, or will you use it as the grave you'll never leave? The soul is speaking. Jung gave you the map to understand its language. Now the question is, what will you do with this understanding? Comment below which form of soul tiredness you recognized in yourself. Not to perform your exhaustion, but to name it honestly so you can finally respond to it with the courage it deserves. And if you want to keep exploring Jung's wisdom, not the comfortable, sanitized version, but the real, challenging, transformative teachings, subscribe. Because the soul's messages don't stop here. You are not meant to live at war with your body. You are not meant to force yourself through a life that doesn't fit. You are not meant to ignore the deepest wisdom you possess. Rest when your soul calls you, but rise when it releases you. Both are sacred, both are necessary. Your transformation is already beginning. The question is whether you'll surrender to it or resist it. Choose transformation. Choose courage. Choose to honor the message without hiding behind it forever. Your new chapter is waiting, but only you can decide to turn the page.